The shit never does not go hard.
Yeah.
Every time.
It just never gets old.
Christmas Stalin. All
It's always
right.
good.
Episode 9. We have our very first guest. Everybody, please welcome Ben.
Hello.
Woo! Cue clap sound.
Comrade Ben. Welcome, Comrade Ben. Yeah. Another Seattleite, another CPUSA member from the Seattle area.
Yep.
Been doing some good work together over the last few months, so it worked out. We had you on.
Happy to be here. Excited.
Very cool. So I guess we were going to start with news, but it seems weird to just ignore him, ignore the...
We could be part of the whole freaking
I don't
thing.
mean ignore him as in ignore him. I mean ignore him as in ignore like why he's here. Like we should talk about you first.
Yeah, exactly.
And then get into
Let's go for it.
Introduce
Who are you?
the guest.
Why are you here?
Who am I? I am Ben, and I'm here because I am a communist.
There we go.
Sure.
And so
Easy enough.
how did you get to become a communist, Ben?
Definitely the process of being a working class person or work for UPS. COVID was extremely radicalizing the process of just being forced to work overtime week after overtime week after overtime week. Like, that can't help but make you feel something. And I started Googling about for... I knew I was more left than a liberal, but I had never really cared to engage with it any deeper than that. And so I Googled leftist podcasts, found the D program, found Rev Left Radio, started listening to that stuff. And the more I listened, the more I was like, okay, I guess I've been a communist. I just didn't know that I was.
Right.
Yeah.
What brought you to CPUSA specifically over like other groups like PSL or even like kind of leapfrogging over DSA, or where did you have any experience with DSA before CP?
No, CPUSA was my first experience organizing. If you talk to any good communist who has engaged with, theory or even just other communists, you will quickly learn that you can't just absorb stuff. You got to get out into the world and start to put it into practice.
Practice it, sure.
And so I was feeling that urge of needing to like, okay, I'm pretty firm, with where I'm at. But what do I do about it, right? And was watching one of the deprogram live streams at one point. I think this was like in the middle, like peak season at UPS, middle of, probably just worked like a 13-hour shift and just totally exhausted, throwing something on. And JT was recommending, various ones. And I don't know why CPUSA stuck out to me, but I pulled it up and filled out the application, started paying dues, and a couple weeks later got on board with the party, and it's been a good experience.
Do you mind if I ask when that was? Like, was this pre or was it post like Kieran's reforming?
Yeah, that would have been last almost a year ago at this point.
Cool.
I think I probably reached out initially in like December, and then they got back to me pretty quick, but then it was on my part be like, I think I'm going to get back to y'all in January when I'm not working 60 hours a week.
Fair enough.
But yeah, no, it was just about a year ago at this point.
Okay, cool. I guess we introduce ourselves at all of these meetings and stuff, but I guess now that I think about it, I haven't heard your story about like when you joined CP, so that's cool. Because I've mentioned before on the podcast that I moved to Seattle in this past June.
Yep.
So I was engaged in the Phoenix party for a while, but I've only been in Seattle. So to me, you had always kind of been there, or at least that was the
right.
The assumption by me.
I'm a legacy member, but not really.
Well, that's I think that's what I'm finding out, because I think Kieran kind of reformed the party, or I don't know if reform's the right word, but kind of reinvigorated it. I think only like 2 years ago.
Yeah, Seattle CPUSA chapter. Really before I joined, I think there was probably maybe like 5 to 10 like really dedicated members, and then we've definitely grown a lot since then,
sure.
Which has been awesome. But I know, like, from my understanding, before, like, my time in, like, the kind of infancy of the Seattle chapter, it was, like, a few people.
Yeah.
And it was, Kieran, like, had to start a new club, essentially, even though it was...
Very
We've
old
learned that
club,
there's
yeah.
supposedly been a Seattle CPUSA
That's what
chapter.
we learned last Sunday or 2 Sundays ago.
But
yeah,
like it was defunct. I mean, if you
Yeah.
have to reform it, then it
Yeah.
clearly was
Well,
not.
yeah, and that guy was saying, and I say that guy, but he was like one of the like he'd been a party member in CP, the Communist Party in Seattle since like the '60s through like
Yeah.
the early
69, I think he
2000s or
said.
something. Yeah, so like maybe sure at that time, but I think from the '90s, 2000s, like aughts, and then maybe early through the teens, it was probably not much. I don't know. I don't know that like the deep history of the Seattle CP in particular. I know there's been ups and downs for every chapter, but I don't know about ours specifically. But since Kieran's reforming, or I keep using the word reforming, but I just mean like since Kieran's like whatever
Launching of the Seattle chapter,
new
yeah.
Seattle chapter. Yeah, things have been great, and that was in 2021, I believe, or 2020. I think he mentioned. Yeah, so
Yep, I think it was like following the George Floyd
Sure.
protests.
And then
A lot
just-
of that energy, especially in his case, somebody was like, "Okay, we did these protests, but now what?"
yeah,
And then channeled that into a party, and hey, now we're here. We're probably,
right.
I mean, we're like twice the size of what we were a year ago when I joined.
Yeah, we're onboarding like 5 people a month now.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Really, we're more than twice the size because when I got here, was it June? Well, I think just like the amount of active members was like 20,
yeah,
right? And so what is it now? Like about 30?
I don't know.
Something like that. I mean,
Yeah.
when I first started up our meetings, we'd be great to have 10 people on a meeting,
Yeah,
and probably have like maybe 6. And like book clubs would be like, there were a lot of book clubs where it was 3 of us,
Yeah.
and we were like, are we even gonna do this?
yeah. Yeah, it's been awesome. Like just the growth of just like coming in. Just I'm interview after interview. I do a lot of the interviews now,
Yeah.
and it's just a constant stream of really cool people, which is great to see. I mean, I think that's a positive. Obviously, that's a positive. Like not just for our club and growth, and just like that we're able to like get more hands on and do more stuff, but also just like as a trend, it's cool to see that like I think people are like becoming more and more just accustomed to and just like less turned off by just the word communist. I think that's,
Yep.
we were doing we were in the U district doing some tabling prior to the Izdahar event that we mentioned last episode. And, we got like some pretty cool people coming up and just having some conversations. And there was a couple of like, I don't want to say like issues, but there was one lady who was just like, I'm on board with the message. You just got to change the name. You just got to rebrand. And that was
No.
her whole thing. And we're just like, no, we're good, man. Like it's the Communist Party. And like, we are proud of that. And like, our job isn't to like accommodate your misinformation about that word.
Yeah.
Your job is to educate yourself and like learn
Yep.
the truth about that word.
That's everyone else's problem.
Yeah.
Well, not to like, yeah. It's a process of unlearning, right?
Yeah.
Like we're
70
working
years of
against
hardcore
propaganda,
propaganda. Yeah.
but like that doesn't mean that we need to reframe what we are.
Yeah.
We need to teach people what we actually are, not
Yeah.
what they've learned.
And I think that's to kind of tie it back to what we talked about last week. And then the Izdahar meeting is like, that's why what she's doing is just so cool of like just really putting a heavy emphasis on just learning from the past, understanding, just like learning the truth about like the history of just, I mean, she focuses on the Soviet Union pretty heavily specifically, but just communism in general and like what that actually means. And that's why like it's just been fun to have conversations with people. And that's kind of one of the better parts about being CP is like going out there tabling, just having those conversations with people and just being like, yeah, we had like, there was quite a few people, that lady notwithstanding, there was a bunch of other people that came up and just like, so what is the deal with communism in 2023? And I was
Right.
like, yeah, we're happy to have that conversation. It was cool. We had a good conversation with a lot of people. And I think we actually got like a couple members out of that tabling alone of like, they liked what we had to say. We gave them some information and they joined up. And then also like a lot of the Izdahar people that came, we tracked back to that table.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
Yeah, we had a bunch of people
So
come
like
out.
it resonated with people, and I think that's even more empowering and gives me more optimism kind of for the future.
And these, from what I'm understanding, these are people that are not even communists. They're just like,
No, they were at a farmer's market in
yeah.
the U district.
See,
They were
like
just-
I was
yeah.
a Marxist for the longest time. So like I wanted to do something. I just didn't know where or how. So like even just getting like the message sprung that, hey, CPUSA or PCL or blah, 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 we're all starting fresh yet again. And there are things that you can join to do a lot of people don't even know that. Like, we need to get that, message out to those people that are already communists in the first place to get them to kind of like bulk up the numbers so we have more active people like getting out there.
Yeah. Well, and it's just so cool that we have enough people now that we have like fully formed committees doing different things, right? Like we have all the people working with the unhoused population, the labor, the educationals, the onboarding stuff. It's just been a lot of fun. But that kind of leads us back. You mentioned it earlier, and I want to kind of steer us back to you instead of just us kind of glorifying the great party of communists. You mentioned UPS, and like I think you mentioned it in the context of peak season for UPS,
Yep.
but you did mention you were a UPS worker, so we did want to talk to you a little bit about that because we know that you're pretty heavily involved with the Teamsters Union as a UPS driver. And I just want to kind of ask you, what's that like? Both, so there's two parts to that question. One is, what are the conditions like for the average UPS worker? But on the other side of that, what is it like to kind of be a member of one of the kind of oldest and most notorious and arguably like most powerful unions in the country?
Sure. I'll start with the first part. The conditions, it really depends on what your position is at the company. For me, I'm a driver. So I am out on the road, driving around delivering packages. Probably the biggest way that I end up being exploited by the company is being forced to work excessive overtime. That's always been a problem. I've been there almost 8 years now, and that's just kind of standard. Every driver works over 40 hours every week. During Christmas time, 60, maybe 70 hours a week.
Right.
If you're inside building, if you're like loading trucks or unloading trucks in a later shift, they get some other problems as far as they don't get screwed as much in the method of overtime, but they get sometimes a lot of them, depending on what, like outside of peak season, they might have the issue of not getting enough hours. Their pay until this last contract was pretty low. That was one of the big victories in the last contract was getting part-time pay better. But yeah, there's a lot of ways you can take that. Even having the distinction between part-time and full-time is problematic,
Right.
depending on how your workplace is set up. What was the second part of your question?
Just about the Teamsters in general, like what's that
Right.
like? Because the way I framed that was, I think I used three like adjectives: oldest, most powerful, and like most notorious unions. One of them of the unions in the country.
So I can say that I have like my complicated feelings over our contracts that we won this last year. But I will say up front, as far as like, I would not be still working at UPS if I wasn't a union place.
Sure.
Like the absolute shit that they put us through. If I wasn't making the wage that I'm making, if I didn't have the benefits that I get, if I didn't have the protections that I do have in place that have been won previously by union struggles, I would have fucking quit so long ago.
Right, 100%.
Like-
Yeah. No, and I know that even like this most recent round of negotiations, like how strong you guys came out on top during those negotiations, and like in particular, like I think we've had this conversation once before about like the employees that are like the warehouse workers, how much protections they got, and of course the drivers as well, like the wage increases, the benefits, like everything that the drivers also came out on top in
Yep.
that last contract. I mean, was that a 2-3 year contract, the most recent?
5 years.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, that's not great. I would love to have a shorter contract term. We had a lot of momentum behind this last contract, and there were some big wins. There was some stuff that didn't get addressed, and having a 5-year negotiating or 5-year period for your contracts.
Yeah.
A lot of that, climate can change in 5 years. A lot of those
Yeah.
people that were fired up might not be as fired up as they were in 5 years. I mean, who knows? That's 5 years from now. But
For sure.
yeah, it's a 5-year contract. Like I've said, there were some big victories. Part-timers got pretty decent wage increases that were desperately needed. Pinned the minimum wage for part-timers at $21 an hour. That is still not a livable wage almost anywhere in the U.S. So
Yes, we mentioned
it's not
that.
enough.
Yeah, we mentioned that last week that like the Kaiser Permanente.
Yeah, the Kaiser Permanente, I think, dropped their raise their new minimum wage
To
outside
22?
of California to 23 an hour.
Yeah, and we're just like that's not.
That's I mean,
Yeah.
that's like the bare minimum. You're scraping every single
Right.
penny every month.
Well, I think the reference I made was I think like McDonald's can earn up to like 22 an hour here, so it's like
Yep.
that's really like it's not a lot to 23 is not a lot to brag about, and I know that sounds crazy, but like that's the whole thing with the push for $15 an hour. It's like that's nothing. I mean, $15 an hour. That's
$15 an hour is what 23 is.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then that's what they're fighting for, like that, or that was the fight. What like earlier this year, whatever maybe that was last year. I don't know. When Kristen Cinema did her dumb like little curtsy when she thumbs down the.
Well, a lot of the $15 an hour is pushing for the federal minimum
the
wage to
federal,
be
yeah.
increased because that's still like $7 an hour.
Yeah.
which is just
Yeah, it's like 7.25 or something. Yeah,
It's
well, that's
like
that's what we
slavery
referenced.
at
We were
that
talking
point.
about like states that are like right to work states with like in the like South. For I think with the example I gave was like Arkansas, where it's like the minimum wage is still because like in the minimum wage here in Washington, I think is like $16.50 or something.
Yeah.
So like that's obviously not good enough. But I mean, if you go somewhere like Arkansas or Georgia or whatever, where the minimum wage is just whatever the federal minimum wage is, like $7.25, it's just insane. And like, like if it's 22 is not livable,
I must make four times that much, and I'm struggling. Imagine making 4 times that much and still struggling.
Yeah.
I can't imagine what these people on federal minimum wage of
before you-
$7.25.
Yeah.
it's like $7.50 or something.
Yeah,
like that.
and
but
before
like,
you
the
come
change
at us-
doesn't help.
Single digits.
Don't come at me saying like, oh, but the cost of living's that doesn't matter. The cost of living isn't that much lower, not 4 times as low. Right?
Exactly.
House pricing in Arkansas is just as inflated as house pricing anywhere else.
And
Groceries
there's
in Arkansas.
less everything. There's less opportunity for
Yeah.
work. There's less stuff to do. There, like there are going to be places where you're
Yeah.
going to be spending more because it's harder to get
Yeah.
stuff out into rural areas.
I'm just tired of hearing that argument of like,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
but
not a
if
good
it-
argument.
It's just that's
Not
a
at
brain dead
all.
argument, and it's not the reason to not pay people a livable wage just because the house may be like 25% cheaper.
Even if it's 50% cheaper,
Yeah,
that means they're still paying twice as much for rent as we would be.
yeah.
But yeah, to get back to like contract stuff, definitely getting an increase on the part-timers' wage was helpful. There was a big push, not from Teamsters proper, but from a lot of actual workers for 25 minimum for part-timers.
Right.
That was not heeded by Teamsters and was obviously not implemented. And so that, in my opinion, and I think a lot of other workers at UPS would agree that was a failure of like, even if like that may not be the union's position, if you have an outspoken group of folks that are Teamsters that are asking that we need $25 an hour as a minimum, hopefully the union would be on board with that, right? Like, but no, we didn't win that one. The biggest win was eliminating the 2-tier drivers
Right.
system.
Yeah, you would explain that to me, but if you can you recap
Yeah.
that briefly?
So in the last contract, previous like 5 years ago, UPS. Well, for context, our last union president was much more in bed with the company, much more concessionary, very willing to extend negotiations, very willing to give away concessions. Sean O'Brien is definitely doing a better job than
Right.
previous leadership.
That previous leadership, that was like Jimmy Hoffa's like grandson.
Yeah,
or
it was
something?
It was a Hoffa.
Yeah.
Which is wild.
That's just when I learned that, I was like, "There's no way that could be true." Still.
Yep.
Yeah.
So yeah, that guy. They had a pretty bad contract that got actually voted down. The majority of votes were no votes, but because of some crappy language in like Teamsters bylaws or constitution or whatever, they were able to enforce the contract because they did not have like a critical mass of eligible votes cast. So because it was like less than half of the workforce that cast a vote, the no vote was disregarded, and they passed the contract
Like a weird
anyways.
quorum thing, I guess.
It was, yeah. I mean, again, this all comes from like having many years of concessionary union leadership of being pretty on the same page as the company.
Right.
That's why that language existed, right? So this contract gets passed, even though it wasn't a huge percentage of the workers that voted, but the majority of the votes were no votes. And in that contract was this language about a 22.4 driver, which, to simplify it, it essentially meant that when UPS was hiring on new drivers, they would be hired at a lower wage. They would cap out at a lower wage than standard delivery drivers do. And initially they pitched this as a hybrid position. Oh, they're going to do maybe a 4-hour delivery route, and then they're going to work in the building, or they're going to, have, I don't know what their plan was, because it never panned out. What ended up happening was that these 22.4 drivers did the exact same job as the rest of us full-time drivers, and they just made less money than we did. It was like if you were there for 4 years, you were making like $10 to $12 an hour less than a regular package car driver was. And even you would be making even less if you were brand new. I think when I want to say they were before this last contract was implemented, the 22.4s were starting at like $22 an hour, 21, $23 an hour. To drive a huge truck around and deliver packages, it's hard work, and you need to be like good at what you're doing.
Right,
You can't be fucking that up. So they were not paying these people very well. So that had to go. And just having that situation where you have people doing the same work, but you are separated in this way, right? So we had to get rid of that.
I think USPS had the same exact problem, because my mom works for the USPS, and they would have people that are called subs, and then they have regular carriers. So you'd have to be a sub for a certain period of time before you can actually become a regular carrier. And as a sub, you'd basically make, I think they were starting the wage at like 19 or 20, I think my mom said. And when you jump to a regular carrier, you're like 30.
Right.
But the same work, and that they would have, but the only like positive thing about it is I think they would get overtime versus regular carrier, where it was salary.
Yeah, I am very glad that I don't make salary. That's yet another reason why I would quit.
Salary, let's go.
If you don't have to work overtime, salary ain't that bad.
I don't work overtime.
But you start talking about overtime, you better be making that extra time and a half.
Yeah, I did. I worked in like a marketing, I worked for this marketing company for 10 years, and for like the last few years I was salary, but I was still working like 50, 60 hours or whatever, and I was just busting my ass.
You're just making like 60% of your money at that point.
I was making that company so much money. It was just a constant frustration.
But yeah, they had the same thing where a 22.4 driver could eventually become a regular package car driver. But normally the way it's always been, at least the last several contracts, has been you started as a driver and it takes you 4 years to get to max pay. Whereas with these 22.4 drivers, it was the center had to have like a certain percentage of them to however many total drivers they had. So you could get stuck in 22.4 for 4 years, 5-6 years.
Jesus.
And then maybe someday when somebody retires, you finally get to move up to be a regular package car driver, and then you get the full pay rate at that point. But it's just a way of dragging that process out.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same as USPS is doing.
And I'm pretty sure UAW, that was one of their sticking points. I want to say that was
all the temporary workers.
They had a temp worker, but it was like guys working like 6+ years for 60 hours a week, and they were classified as temp workers, so they weren't getting half the pay, half the benefits. It was just a way for the company just to kind of like classify an employee as something less than, so they could pay them less, but then maximize the amount of work they get out of them, which is
And one of the other way that 22.4 drivers were extra exploited was that regular package car drivers had if you didn't want to work overtime, you had avenues through which you could fight against getting overtime. You could file grievances to get penalty pay for being forced to work additional overtime. But the 22.4 drivers were not allowed to file grievances on any of that stuff. They were able to force them to work overtime, as long as they weren't exceeding like federal law as far as how many hours you're able to be on the road. They were able to work them as much as they wanted. Those 22-4 drivers had no recourse. So that got cut.
That's awesome.
Like that got rid of. That was a huge victory.
Do those employees get converted just overnight?
They all got converted straight across to RPCDs,
That's
regular
awesome.
package car drivers. Like they all are. Now there's no longer any distinction. It's all just based on how long have you been here. And the only the pay is still a 4-year progression, and the only other stuff is like
Does that like
vacation and such.
does
It's
that,
all
like-
based on seniority.
Is that like retroactive for like so guys that were 22.4 for like the past 4 years? They just get like a $12 an hour raise just overnight.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
Dude.
yeah.
That
No,
will-
those
Yeah.
instances are why this contract was really big.
Yeah.
Um,
That just like improve the quality of life so much for like tens of thousands.
or like
maybe?
the part timers that went from like $15 an hour to like 20 plus an hour.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, very big.
And that was all without avoiding a strike too, right? The Teamsters, you never went on strike.
We did not go on strike.
That's awesome. Shout out to Sean O'Brien.
I have some feelings about it. I don't know. I kind of wish we had gone on strike. I
Oh?
think it would have been,
Even better.
yeah.
You got a little more maybe.
But also, I think it would have been a hugely. I mean, we've been watching, the writers and the actors be on strike,
and
right?
UAW, yeah.
And that's been it's been in the news. It's been a very radicalizing experience for a lot of folks, whether they're a part of those unions or whether they're just observing from the outside. So if there had been a situation where us UPS workers went on strike, I don't think we would have been on strike very long. Like
No,
it would have
100%
ground
no.
things to a halt.
Yeah.
But people would have felt it, and people would have seen, and especially for the workers. Now I've heard, there may have been concerns over how much of an actual willingness in the workforce there was to walk out. I can only speak to my center that I work out of, and there might have been a few scabs that we would have had, but I'm pretty confident that like every single one of us would have
Pretty solid group of
walked
guys.
out. There might have been a couple folks that just aren't on board, but that from my understanding, from what I've heard, as far as reaction to not going on strike, was that maybe that was one of the big reasons it was trying to be avoided, was
Right.
because if you go on strike and you have like a limp dick strike and not enough people come out,
You can lose power.
it's
Yeah.
really bad.
Yeah.
So you do not you don't want to
If
have
you're gonna
that.
pull that card, you have to be ready to like commit. Well, yeah, and I don't want to like make it sound like writing and acting is is more of like a superficial commodity, or like less of a societal importance, I guess, because all work is work, and I don't want to make that sound. But I mean, like the difference in like writers going on strike and how that can impact the economy and just impact like just America versus like something like UPS going on strike.
Yeah.
Like what that can do to American economy, like that's a lot of businesses not getting like stuff. That's just I mean that would have a much more significant cultural and like news impact. Like that's a lot of power.
And
to bring to
economic.
bear. Yeah,
It would have a huge economic impact.
Yeah, for
like,
sure.
I want, this is off the top of my head, but I want to say that leading up to contract negotiations, there was figures going around about how UPS handles 6% of the country's GDP,
Yeah.
which, like, the fact that you can measure it is
That's insane. Just measuring it alone,
A
but
lot.
that's also 6%. I mean, that's a chunk. That's
Yeah,
that's gotta be
so-
smaller than like a few states
and
combined.
there's a lot of crap that we deliver that's not necessary, but there's also stuff like we deliver tons of medication.
Medicines, yeah.
We deliver, countless stuff that's
Yeah, but I mean, I think like
critical.
all supplies for restaurants, supplies for small businesses. I mean,
Yep.
like that, how much that would impact like small businesses that require you for like all their like needs or whatever. Like it's just that there is a ripple effect there when you have like, well, that was with the whole railroad strike of like how
Yeah.
that got averted was just so frustrating because like that could have had the national power to really like they could have demanded anything they wanted had the government and Biden in particular not like intervened in that. Like how much power that they can bring to bear when you bring a strike of that kind of magnitude.
it feels like the kind of thing like you'd be on strike for like 2 or 3 days,
Yeah,
and
at
then
most,
everyone
yeah.
would be losing their minds
Yeah.
because nothing's
In
functioning.
24
Yeah,
hours,
like
you would feel that hit. I think almost immediately, right? And like
Right.
that's kind of what I mean by like the writers and actors because Hollywood is such a slow moving. Like a
they
year.
have such a longer process.
Yeah, the ramp up to a movie is 2 years or whatever, right? So, but I mean, like you go a day without your packages, people start panicking.
Oh, yeah.
So, Well, speaking of Sean O'Brien, I want to kind of pivot us, if you don't mind, and
Yeah, sure.
I assume as we go through this conversation, there's going to be kind of sprinkled in with as of your kind of your personal opinions on everything. But Sean O'Brien was in the news. Was it
this is
today or
funny.
yesterday? You're aware of this?
I saw this.
Yeah,
It
did you
was
see
very
this
funny.
come on?
I have not heard of this.
Bernie
no.
Sanders had to referee a fight between Sean O'Brien and his name is. He has the dumbest name.
It's
His
like
name is
Mark Wayne.
Mark Wayne Mullen. He's an Oklahoma senator, a Republican senator. It was the committee on.
By a fight, are we talking about like physical, or are we talking about like a debate?
So no. Well, it almost got physical. Bernie. I mean,
wow.
Mark Wayne was trying to throw down.
Yeah, because I guess Sean O'Brien has been tweeting at this Republican senator, calling him like he's just been talking shit to him on Twitter, and so Sean O'Brien came before this Senate committee, and then this is apparently when this like ego-driven Republican senator he decided to use his time to like read tweets and like call out Sean O'Brien like I'm here now, you're here now. Do you want to go outside? And Sean O'Brien was like,
what is
yeah.
this, like Andrew Jackson
Dude,
era?
it's just so bizarre. And
I
then Sean
challenge you to
O'Brien
a
like
duel.
did not back down. He's like, yeah, you fucking clown. Like, let's go outside. And then like this dude, this Republican senator, like stands up and like starts taking off his rings, whatever. And Bernie Sanders is like the chair of this committee.
Everybody
And
calm
he's
down!
It's exactly
Calm
what happened.
down!
He's banging his gavel and he's like, sit
Please.
down. You're a sitting U.S. senator. Sit down. And it's just so funny, dude. So I wanted your opinion on this, as you know, this is your leader.
Yeah.
Your labor leader here.
I will say about Sean O'Brien, that man is he's a very, very effective showman, propagandist.
Yeah.
He is really good at what he's been doing. And I think he played that very well. You know, he just sat there, hands
Yeah.
nicely clasped, and you want to go? Let's.
Yeah,
sure.
he was completely composed. He was like, yeah,
Yep.
if we want to do this, let's do this.
And he just totally let this other guy,
Yeah.
fly off, and it makes him look like
foolish,
a
yeah.
complete idiot.
Yeah, I will say though, however, if we're gonna play this through to the end, I was looking into Mark Wayne Mullen. He is an ex MMA fighter. He's like
I've
shit.
seen this. Yeah.
So like,
He,
I don't know if Sean O'Brien could take him. Sean O'Brien's a big tough guy, but this guy's MMA, so I don't know. That's one for the
That would have
comments. I
been
guess. I
great
don't know.
content.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Well, if only Bernie Sanders hadn't stepped in.
I mean, I feel the same way about it though. Of like, there's been that thing going around with like Zuckerberg and Elon are going to fight
yeah.
or whatever.
Oh, God.
That's been so
and-
It's
frustrating.
for clout.
It's
so
all
dumb.
just it's
Just showmanship.
machismo. It's
It's just,
machismo
yeah.
on both sides.
I
like
think
you know,
less
this-
so on Zuck's side, because Zuck is like actually like a trained MMA
Sure.
fighter. He does a lot of like training, and like he even called out Elon. He's like, "This is all for show. When you're ready to fight, I'll be here. If you hear anything, unless you hear it from me, it's not
Right.
real." And he just kind of wanted to shut Elon down because Elon's just posturing, and that's all Elon,
Well,
Elon most does.
that's common from Elon because
Yeah.
whenever Elon's stocks drop, Tesla, blah blah blah, he just fucking says something, preposterous, and his fucking stocks go flying through the roof. He'll say some shit, and Tesla stocks will jump up 10%.
Yeah.
So, I think that's part of it, at least what it is just like. Not just an ego boost, but like whatever spotlight is in his face, it's gonna make his money go up.
Yeah, I mean that's really what it is. I mean, like I don't know. I fucking hate talking about Elon Musk. I just find it such a waste of time to like give that dude airtime.
yeah, sorry to bring him up.
No, that's not your fault. It's all
sucks.
good. Yeah,
He's the
I
genius
just-
of our generation.
Yeah, I saw a really funny like meme was say it was like it's the best radar to find out who of your friends is an idiot to like who still likes Elon Musk. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah. It's
I don't.
just-
Are there people that still like that man? I guess,
probably like on Twitter somewhere. Like if you see a Twitter blue check mark or whatever, I don't think it's called Twitter blue
All
anymore.
the
but a blue
nerds
check
jumping
mark.
for Elon Musk. That one
Yeah.
meme where there's just people like trying to catch a bullet
Just-
from The Simpsons.
Yeah. Okay. Well, to carry on with House news, there's a couple. Not a whole lot's happened, or at least not that I've cared about. But in the little research I did today, the House did just pass a short-term funding bill to avoid a government shutdown. If you recall, they were coming up on November 15th was the previous deadline. I believe is today. Yeah, recording on November 15th. That was so that was passed. The Senate got kicked to the Senate. Senate actually, I just got a notification on my phone. I think the Senate just approved it. It only funds it through mid-January, so we're just kicking the can down the road.
Yeah, I was about to say.
There's a reason for that, and actually 93 Republicans voted against it, so it just barely passed because it didn't include any kind of cuts. And so the Republicans were trying to tank that bill because it didn't really include any cuts, because the new Speaker, Johnson, didn't include any cuts. And I guess people are already getting frustrated with Speaker Johnson's leadership. And I don't know how familiar you are with this, because we've been following the House story pretty closely because we talk about it every week, as much as I don't want to, but here we are.
I'm generally aware.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw when that guy got finally they got the nomination through.
Yeah. Yeah,
And then,
this rogue agent kind of came through who it was looking like it was Scalise. It was looking like it was what's his face Jordan for a while, and then it just ended up being this rando. From
well, and then
Louisiana.
immediately following, it's like we were learning, oh, good, he's like a fundamentalist Christian. And
the
he's
worst
just like,
person, a hardcore,
Yeah.
like a hardcore
It's
January
bad.
6th, like a hardcore Trump big
Yeah.
liar. Yeah, I mean this guy is crazy. His wife runs like this abortion,
Anti-abortion
right? Like
clinic.
his anti-abortion clinic, dude. They're like hardcore, like
Yeah.
fundamentalists. But I guess there's already stirrings of like a lot of like the whole like that whole far right section that are already kind of rumblings that it's like this guy might not have a job for very long, which would be just it's just Congress is in complete fucking disarray, and it would be embarrassing if I gave a shit about like America's image, but I don't. But
Right.
it's like what America projects to the world as just such clown shoes. It's
I'm
just
just amazed that Americans can watch this shit and like not see through it.
Well,
right?
I mean, I think that they are turning. I think Congress
Some folks
it
are.
has like an all-time record low approval, and like just like people have completely lost faith in the government. People,
There's always an all-time record of lower approval.
yeah, I guess.
I mean, like 4 years ago, it was at like 13%, and it really can't get much lower
Yeah.
than that.
I just think that like people are just I don't know. I don't know what else to say. We talk about the house every week, and every week is just nonsense.
It's like what I said like what was like a couple of weeks ago is like Americans are the most anti-government people, but whenever they think of like what is anti-American government, they're like communism. They're like the Manchurian candidate stands up in their head and just like communism is evil.
Libertarians are anti-government unless they're police or the military.
Yeah.
unless they're 40% of the government.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think Red Scare has a little bit to do with that.
Yeah, and then
And education.
I 100% agree. It's just frustrating, and I don't know. I don't know, like because I have a note on here like there's Trump updates, right? Like we kind of forgot about that guy, right? But he's been flying from state to state, like trial to trial, and like apparently his trials are not going well. And it's like I was gonna like
For him or for
him, yeah.
Okay.
He's not like I haven't really followed that story because like I have a note that says Trump update ? Who cares ? Because I'm just like, do we care?
I mean, at this point, it's like dude could lose all of his stuff and be penniless and probably still run
Still
for
get the
president
nomination,
from prison, and
Still win
his
the
base
Republican
would be
primary.
so happy to elect him again. So,
Yeah, I don't know. Like I just like
yeah.
I find Trump news almost as boring as like Elon Musk news, where I'm just like, I don't care anymore, man. I'm just so burned out of like hearing Trump's name and like talking about Trump every week. And like we've actually never mentioned Trump on this podcast in
There's
our
no
9
point.
episodes, or at least we haven't like had any news about him. Like we don't talk about Trump. If we've talked about him, it's just been in relation to like Biden's polling or whatever. But I mean, like we haven't actually talked about like Trump's trial updates or anything. And I'm like, do we?
Yeah.
want
That's
to?
what because everybody's talking about Trump's trial
Yeah.
updates. I feel like it's kind of like it's not even necessary.
I think the only thing that's worth talking about is like I forget what the context was, but like he keeps talking shit about the judges like on recesses or whatever, and he'll come back and they'll call a court back to session, and then like in that meantime the judge will have like received tweets from Trump or whatever, and she's like, you can't be doing this, and like he's just constantly getting in trouble at all of his trials because he's just doing Trump things, and that's what Trump does is Trump things where like he just can't follow the rules and he just constantly just talk shit to people.
I did nothing wrong,
And
and
it's
they
just-
still
yeah,
indicted me.
You do a pretty good job.
I think that the big thing with all of these trials is, at least in relation to Trump, is I think it can be used in a way to point out to folks how just much of a farce
Yeah.
all of that shit is, right? Like, man's not going to have any meaningful, consequences for
Yeah.
anything bad that he did. There's a very real possibility where he gets convicted of a bunch of shit, becomes the president, and pardons himself for everything.
Yeah, I mean that would
Like,
be
or
wild
he
to see.
gets
It would be
convicted
awesome.
for some stuff, and like maybe he has to pay some money, but they're not going to put that man in prison.
no. He's never going to prison.
Like,
there's still like there's still like these liberal like news outlets that are like this is it. This is the one that's going to put Trump behind bars, and it's like, dude, this is the.
You've been saying that for like 7 years, dog.
This
and
is
I
just-
think we can use that though to point out to folks that that may not be as far left, and to show that no, he's part of the ruling class.
Yeah.
They might slap him on the wrist and say, "Hey, in these instances, you exposed some stuff that we didn't like, or you maybe did some things that we didn't like that became, public,
Yeah.
and we don't like that became public." And they may be trying to correct his behavior, but at the end of the day, he's all part of that club, and they That's not to say that, like, the bourgeois or the ruling class doesn't have, times where they might have infighting or disagreements among, various members of that class, but there's not really a situation where it's going to be beneficial to, the country, the people in charge at least, to really put the consequences down on this man, right? Like, it's not gonna play out like that.
The moment you do, you're setting a standard for other people as well.
Right.
Because
They'll
if you
never
can
allow
get
that to
Trump, you
happen,
can get other people.
Yeah.
This guy was an ex-president. This guy's a billionaire. What's holding back on, imprisoning some other billionaire for tax evasion or for being on Epstein's plane or whatever, accusation they might have. So they don't want to have that cascade effect.
Yeah.
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 Trump is exhausting.
Yeah. And I think, like, the one kind of other side to that is, like, the reason you see so many news reports and the reason you see so much, like, hype from the liberal side of things is like, oh, is this time he's going to jail, this time he's going to jail. And you see that from, like, the liberal leaders as well, like politicians and stuff. And I think that's just, like, that's a fundraising tactic. That's like a,
Oh, yeah.
that's a, like, support our side
It
tactic.
sells ratings.
Yeah, and it's a ratings, it's a news ratings thing.
All
So,
you
yeah.
fuckers in jail.
Yeah. Yeah, like, as if, like, Biden at this point, like, has committed any less crimes than Trump. I mean, like, not the same types of crimes, but,
I mean, it kind of ties into what we might talk about, like that Israel protest.
Yeah.
You have Hakeem Jeffries, you have the
Schumer
new
was
Speaker of the
there.
House,
Yeah,
literally all
Johnson
these
was there,
people
yeah.
in the same exact thing, pro-Israel.
yeah. Well,
It's
actually,
kinda-
I just pulled that up. I was just pulling up the notes for that. Was there was, if we're ready to move on, there was a massive pro-Israel rally in D.C. Yesterday, or was that today even? I don't know. I'm so fried. My days are blending together. I'm so close, dude. I have 2 more days of school before I get a week break. So
Yeah, you're almost there.
I'm
Hang
so
in
close,
there.
dude. Tired of grading papers. Yeah, so I apparently here, according to the Times of Israel, which I don't know how if we can really
It's
trust
the most
that.
reliable
The
source
most
in the
reliable
world.
source
Yeah, it's
about
probably
this.
a really.
Trust me.
Well, I was trying to look up.
You have
I was
to
trying to look
trust
up
me.
the numbers there. It's 300,000. They said the Times of Israel claims 300,000 rally in Washington. I cannot believe that's true.
I can't
Al
believe
Jazeera
that is
says
30,000.
tens of thousands. Al Jazeera says tens of thousands. Times of Israel says 300,000. So maybe we'll split the difference. I don't know. But as you mentioned, among the attendees were a lot of kind of mainstream American politicians. Speaker of the House Johnson was there. Chuck Schumer was there. Hakeem Jeffries there. A whole bunch of a lot of the Republican caucus showed up. But yeah, they showed up in there to support show their support for Israel. That's not surprising. I mean, what we've seen from American politicians, besides the few standouts like Rashida Tlaib, who was censured for saying anything. We talked about that quite a bit last week. But yeah, like, I don't know what there is to say about that. I mean, we can kind of move into Israel updates because I don't have anything specific updated.
I saw some stuff on my favorite social media on TikTok.
Sure.
I know you love TikTok, Tommy.
Yeah, big TikTok.
Um,
I am like on record as like no. I was texting Kanan a few days ago. I was like, I don't understand how TikToks work, and I'm getting frustrated. Like,
It's so good. It's such a good
I'm such
platform.
a
You just
fucking
gotta
boomer, dude. I'm such
make
a
an
boomer.
account and then just like dive in
Yeah.
and just like spend like.
I mean,
30
like I meant
minutes.
like the UI. I was getting frustrated. I'm like,
yeah.
I am hard. Like for a 35-year-old, I'm the most boomer man you've ever met. I hate social media.
It's the mustache. If you shave it off, you'll be.
I'll be able to use social media.
Yeah,
again.
exactly.
But like my wife will attest to this. Of like I'm like I get frustrated when I have to do anything on my mobile. Like I'm like I need my fucking laptop. Where's my laptop? I hate doing things on my phone. Anyway.
But yeah, I had seen a couple TikToks about that big rally, and I mean it's just speculation, but people were saying like it's really feeling like the Trump inauguration is very much feeling like a lot of these folks are probably paid to be here, and then also contrasting it with various other
the Palestinian
pro-Palestine
Yeah.
protests that have clearly way more people turning out to them.
I mean, you could even
New
see the
York.
street, the sidewalk.
Yeah, flooding New York, flooding LA, flooding Chicago, just
And
like,
globally too, not
yeah,
even just
and
here in the
all over
U.S.,
the world,
right?
Yeah. Well, and also like to mention of the Israel protests, there's been quite a few like images popping up of like just like candid shots of like protesters in that mob, and it's a lot of Israeli flags or whatever. But then there's also like a lot of like posters or whatever that's like like in the Gazans and like let's finish this and stuff like that. So it's also just very, even at home, even in like a very public march, it's very mask off, like still very genocidal, and that's
The other thing that I
awesome to
saw
see.
was a group of Zionists were stranded on the tarmac at an airport because they had like chartered a bus to take them to the protest, and the workers did not. They were like refused.
Yo!
just from like a DC, like Dulles or something, like a DC
It's from somewhere in DC, yeah. But the thing it made me think of is like it's reminding me also of January 6th of like who are these people that are able to fly out
Yeah,
to DC
for just a random rally.
for a protest,
On a
like
random Wednesday or
as opposed to like
Tuesday.
the DTC Palestine protests. I don't think you had a lot of people flying out. I think that was just
That's
people
just
from that
yeah.
area that legitimately feel that way, right?
Yeah.
Whereas these manufactured
Yeah,
like protests that help kind of maintain the status quo will frequently have it has a very different class makeup, right? We saw that with January 6th
100%,
of lots of business owners,
Yeah.
lots of
it's all small business owners is what
Yep.
January 6th was made up of. Yeah,
and I'm thinking, and at least the some of the reactions I've seen, and like that one of like, okay, so you had a bunch of people that were on the same airplane that got left on the tarmac to get on and were not able to get on their chartered bus to go somewhere. How were all of these people on one airplane? Right, like there's a level of organization there,
Yeah.
and there's a
That's a good
level
point.
of like you're all clearly not working class folks.
yeah.
Like I can't go get on an airplane and on a whim and go to the East Coast.
You can, but you'd have to dip into your savings and shit like that and be like, okay, I might get fired because I can't show up to work for the next 2 days.
I got bills.
Yeah.
I just had to save up and finance a trip to see my family next week for Thanksgiving. So I'm like, yeah, me just whipping out to DC on a whim is not in my cards. Yeah.
Yeah, but then there's suddenly just 50 fucking people just like, you know what, let's go on some random fucking Tuesday to go protest, pro-Israel,
And
all on the same plane at the same time.
That's a really good take, though. I hadn't even considered that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
but it is what we saw for January 6th.
I
There's a lot of
haven't
parallels.
done the research, but it's not hard to see how many various places are having huge Palestinian pro-Palestine protests.
Yeah.
Versus how many like pro-Israel demonstrations have there been,
Well,
like that aren't
this is the
happening like
first
this one
one
or
that-
like in Israel?
Yeah.
Like you might see some weirdos out with some signs on a freeway
Yeah.
overpass or something, but I don't know. I'd be curious to see like comparison of how many actual pro-Palestine ones are like naturally happening versus how many of these pro-Israel ones are actually taking place.
And that raises a good point. I'd like to see some polling too, because like to scale that back a little bit and just look at it like as a from where the country stands. Like, how many people are still kind of on board with like pro support of Israel? I mean, we know the politicians are because like they're afraid to not be, I guess. But like,
kinda
I
have
want to
to
know
be, yeah.
like what about
'cause
like
they're
where are the
paid.
American people? Well, that's fair too. But like where are the American people? And I know we saw a lot of public opinion kind of turning. I mean, like October 7th. Never saw more support for Israel, but then like every subsequent hospital and school bombing, people have just been kind of like more and more like
Because it was
we're a
basically the
month in
status
now.
quo, like, oh, this
Yeah.
is what we have to do, and then real people started realizing, But you know what it also reminded me of is like those AI images that were basically exposed because Israel was using, and this was like the Twitter account of Israel was using AI images of people protesting for Israel, but then you would look over like on the windowsill and there'd be like 3 people, one person with like 3 arms holding 2 flags. And then like 15 fingers, and you're just like, oh shit, this is not even a real photo, and this is like actual government accounts spreading this shit. You're like, oh my god.
Yeah, Israel has really dropped the ball on the propaganda on this one. Like,
Yeah.
it
they've
is
completely
not,
lost public opinion,
Yep.
lost propaganda, like just done such a bad job. I mean, and like, I guess that's like not surprising when like you're literally committing atrocities. Like, it's like, I mean, it's hard to spin that. I would say, like in the 21st century, in 2023, it's going to be hard to spin atrocities. Like in the 40s, that was way easier to cover up and was way easier to propagandize.
There's no social media.
Yeah, but like in 2023, like when like everyone has a cell phone and we can just see reporters being killed, like reporters filming like bombs going off. There's like
Yep.
been a bunch of footage of like a reporter filming bombs until they themselves were killed, and like the footage kept rolling, which was a pretty heartbreaking video to watch. Like, it's pretty hard to propagandize that. It's pretty hard to spin just piles of dead kids, right? Like, which is what we're literally seeing. So
Like 6,000 now.
There's no justifying
Yeah.
killing of children. Like you can put out this bullshit that Hamas is using people as human shields, and it's just
They've been saying the same shit for so long.
yeah. And honestly, it's like, okay, if a hypothetical situation, I have a weapon or for some reason, and somebody is using a person as a human shield, I'm not going to shoot the person that they're
Yeah.
using as a human shield. I'm going to try to find any other situation that I can resolve this without
really
having
good
to
point.
kill somebody.
That's one
Like,
person. That's one person.
Yeah.
This like the civilian toward like Hamas account is like literally like 70 civilians per one Hamas target. So they'd be like, oh, there's a mosque. There's a mosque right there. There's 71 people in the mosque. There's one Hamas person. Good
Maybe.
enough. Kill them
Yeah.
all. Dink.
Yeah.
Like you can't. How do you justify killing one person
Yeah.
just to get to that person? Yet alone 70 people, and half of those people are children.
Well, I think that was the stat I saw, which was like they've confirmed, like I think it was like 70 Hamas confirmed Hamas deaths, and it's like, well, we're at 11,000 civilian deaths, so like your batting average there is like 0.004 or something. It's just
Yeah,
like
dude.
insane.
I mean, I think it's becoming extremely obvious that this is just the plan.
Yeah,
This is like, and they're really not. Maybe they're trying. They're not doing a very good job of covering up that the plan is just killing as many Palestinians as they possibly
just
can.
Ethnic cleansing, just open ethnic cleansing. Well, and that's why we were worried. That's what, on the very first outbreak. That was what we were talked about. Is that like that's what we were like. Well, what's going to happen here? Like, what's the possible outcome? And we were like, well, the worst case scenario is just like the end of the Palestinian people from at the hands of Israel, and that's like not unrealistic at this point.
Or World War III.
Or World War III, and actually that's what we talked about too. That was the
Yeah.
other outcome. There was like two possible outcomes: complete genocide with no one really stopping it, or World War III.
I was listening to Kyle Kalinske today, and he's like explaining. He's like, "Hey, man, the mount they're going into someplace. They're they're going into Gaza. They're basically plowing the entire city to a pulp. The whole idea might not be killing every Palestinian, but basically destroying the entire structure of Gaza to the point where Gaza is not livable. And now I hear that they're trying to get countries like Egypt to move all the Gazan people into the Sinai Peninsula and just basically create like tent towns.
Yeah.
A reservation.
Yeah, reservation basically, just to kick them out or just to move them across anywhere in the world. They're asking countries how many Gazan Palestinians they'll take. And so I think their motive at this point is just basically level Gaza and just rebuild an Israeli foundation upon that. Because even if the Gazans survive all this bombardment, all this, killings and stuff like that, when they come back to normalcy or whatever we think might be normalcy, there is no structure. Like they have no running water. Half their buildings are literally gone. And so they did ethnic cleansing by basically destroying the foundation of which these people live in. So,
yeah, it's been really rough to watch. The one thing that has been giving me a little bit of hope, and this is why you need to get on TikTok, because this is where all the real ones are.
I understand that's where most news is happening.
Well, it's more that like yes, the information's getting out through that quite a bit, but also it's the framing of it. Like, granted, my algorithm is very lefty, right?
Sure.
The stuff I'm seeing is very lefty, but then I'm getting videos of people that are talking about Palestine, and they have 400,000 likes and like millions of views. Like, this is very heartening to see that. Like, it's one thing for me to be getting fed stuff that is fulfilling my confirmation bias.
Sure.
The algorithm's going to give me stuff I want to watch, but when that stuff that I want to watch, I'm able to see that hundreds of thousands of other people have engaged with it and liked it and are also on board. The comments are all Free Palestine. There's been all these various trends going on of like to the point where there's a silly filter that's related to it's like you draw a little line and there's a watermelon, and the reason they're using a watermelon is because of the colors, black, white, green, red. To as a kind of a stand-in for the Palestinian flag.
Sure.
But like, evidently use of that filter is whoever made it is sending funds to help Palestine, and so just tons of accounts of people just like, yeah, sure, I'll do this little filter. It takes me no time at all, and the people that you might not expect to take a political stand. I've seen that as well. I don't just follow communists on TikTok. I follow a number of folks, and been pleasantly surprised to see how many people are on the right side of this. And occasionally you'll get the one or two that are clearly just misinformed or not brainwashed. That's not, I don't like that term, but they're propagandized. They don't understand reality.
Sure. Detached.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or they're so blinded by their, if you grow up, with any kind of ideology that's, really warping your perspective, as opposed to, something that kind of forces you to be more critical and really ask questions and look at things realistically. If you're, I grew up Christian. It's kind of an example I can draw on. When you're looking at the world through that lens, you're not going to be seeing things realistically. You're going to be seeing things through a way that makes sense to you, right? And the same can be said for Zionists.
Yeah.
You're always going to be seeing that side, and then until they choose to maybe reassess their own point of view, they're going to be stuck there.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's well said. And we're seeing that. We're seeing just like kind of battle lines being drawn, and people are, and this is not uncommon, or excuse me, this is not unique to now. This has kind of been the trend for going on a while now, of just people digging in and just kind of refusing to really like acknowledge even somebody else's side, like not willing to kind of engage in any kind of conversation about really anything.
Well, I think it's kind of, we're breaking away from that like whole bimodal system of Democrat Republican, where people are kind of being like, hey, we don't have to be a liberal nor conservative to have your own inclusive thoughts and have other people agree with you, because when you grew up in like the 90s and 2000s here, it was just like liberal versus conservative, and it's obviously back through like shows like Family Guy. You had Family Guy was kind of like on the liberal / democratic, and then you had American Dad was like the Republican. There was no like third set of ideologies, because like when you have, for example, pro-Israel is both Democrat and Republican. Sure. They, at least from the political spectrum of like the politicians, they're both pro.
There's not like in American politics, there's not an anti-Israel stance.
Exactly.
Like it doesn't exist.
And this is really good for communists, because we're like, okay, both. This is obviously like Palestinian people are in the right here, obviously. And if you don't see that, you're like fucking blind, or you're just evil, right? And so when you see that both parties are for that, you're gonna be like, what is going on here? Why is there no parties that believe in an actual like a human atrocity that is going on? You're just like, might have to rethink if I'm a Democrat.
No, I mean that's good, and that's like when you see that kind of cognitive dissonance, or when like kind of a mainstream average normie sees that kind of like and experiences that dissonance of like, well, hey, wait a minute, like this is obviously bad, but both sides are telling me it's good. Then like maybe there is something hinky going on.
And there's that fucking commie in the background. We're like, they're both trash,
Hey, it turns out we've had the answers for a while now.
Well, and you also weirdly have like, there's always been something in America, that there's a type of person in America that will be like, both the Democrats and the Republicans are bad. They're all lying to you, right? Yeah. But then they stop there, right? You've had this type of guy or person in U.S., just in our culture of like, oh yeah, all the politicians are lying to you, but then they don't take it
one step further.
Further to be, actually really examining that. It just kind of lets themselves off the hook, right? It lets them not feel okay with not engaging with politics, or not, they realize that they don't have any power to make any change, and that is kind of saying that in that way of like, well, both sides are bad. You're kind of, like I said, you're letting yourself off the hook, as opposed to what we do on the left. Communists will say, okay, no, but then you actually have to do something. Once you recognize that neither political party or any aspect of like American politics, proper, none of that stuff is going to give you the answers, right? They're always going
100%.
to be wrong, but then you have to find a different way, right? You have to start organizing. You have to start actually doing something in the real world, as opposed to just stopping there.
That's how
moving
deep
on.
the propaganda is. And you'd be like, okay, but what about what is anti-America? What about communism? They're like, nope, that is bad. That is evil. That is this. That is that. I'm like, so you call both things, both parties, they're wrong and they're both not good. But when you give you an alternative, that is literally the quintessential anti-Republican Democrat capitalism.
Well,
The propaganda is so deep, even you can bypass those two parties. The propaganda is so deep that you're still going to reject.
And you'll even have
communism.
people sometimes that will be so. They'll even have that seed of anti-capitalism. They'll even understand of like, oh, that's all the lobbyists. It's all, all these politicians are bought out.
That's why I
By
don't trust
who? By like what?
Yeah.
Why is that bad?
You're almost there, dog. You're almost there.
Yeah, well,
You're
that
so
that was
close.
the constant like rhetoric, or the constant like line of like frustration with the QAnon people. Is like they're so
right.
close.
They are very close.
They're like anti-government. They understand that like the government's they're all in it together. It's all this like they're all out to get you. There's this like the secret kind of like society is against you. And it's the Jews, and you're like, "Damn it!"
they identify like all of the correct
issues,
problems,
and instead of like just being like, "Oh, it's capitalism," or it's like the
God
ruling
damn it.
class, they're like, "Oh, it must just be the Jews or whatever." And you're like, "God damn it! You were so close to getting it." And that's why I've had this conversation with my wife. Is like, I think that like those type of people, like working class right wing people, are much easier to like bring over to communism than like liberal elitist kind of people, because like they'll never budge. They're like blue no matter who to their dying breath. But like I feel like QAnons are almost closer and easier to like bring over, because you just need like a couple conversations.
You have to
over,
spell
like,
it out for them.
Yeah, you just gotta have a few beers at like your local place and just like have a conversation with them for a couple hours over a few beers, and like you can get them.
I think it very much can depend on the individual, but I don't think you're wrong, right? Like I think if you're already the kind of person that's open to believing that, like, I don't know,
Something is
Pizzagate or some other shit is real, then maybe like somebody explaining some shit to you that is actually true, that isn't even nearly as outlandish as all of the conspiracy theories that QAnon gets up to. They might be,
and I don't mean like the hardcore, like, because QAnon got weird too. But I just
Well,
mean, like,
but even
that
then,
type
like,
of
if-
person that's like just they understand that like they're all in it together, and like fuck the government, but
Right.
like, and I don't mean like that kind of like that, like kind of what you're mentioning too is like that letting yourself off the hook. That like I think it was like there was one when it was regarded with climate change, it was like white nihilism. It's like, well, the Earth is going to shit, so there's nothing we can do about it, so we might as well not try. And that's that kind of like I think they call that white nihilism, of like just that like nihilist perspective, which is a very like privileged position to be in. It's like, well, no. Yes, that's true. It is going to shit, but you should still fight for it. Like we can still do something. And the same is true with like politics.
Yeah, the climate change is an easy way to get yourself into that nihilist point of view, but like for sure you have to.
Yeah, I didn't mean to switch the conversation.
No,
to
no,
climate
but
change,
like
I mean like that's a parallel that you see oftentimes with the same kind of mindset of just like, well, there's nothing we can do about it, so might as well not try.
Yeah, the like cognitive dissonance can like lead you to just shutting down and refusing to engage further with it, right? Like I mentioned previously, I was raised Christian. I'm not anymore, but I don't know if my family sees it. They'll know.
They'll know. Apparently Kavan's mom watches, I just found
fine.
out, which is strange.
But
shout out to
no,
Kavan's
like
mom.
there's so much of living life, as and I'm not here to shit on religion, but like, at least the Christianity that I grew up in was I left because I was running up against cognitive dissonance a lot, and it was not. Nobody could explain it to me in a way that made sense, and I still had fucking questions, and like I needed answers that actually made sense, not that like short circuited and stopped my thought process.
Yeah.
And that's what cognitive dissonance will do, right? If you start to feel bad about this, and then you have your pre-scripted like answer that you tell yourself to shut down the process.
The Manchurian script, you know.
Yep. Stop engaging with it. Don't think about it anymore.
Yeah.
Because of whatever your explanation is, right? But and hopefully more and more people will start to work through that, right? Like, you know, it's an individual journey on that, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But like,
then I think more and more people, like we mentioned earlier, like are
waking
moving
up
that faster. I mean, like I think that's always been the slow, like liberal to DSA to CPUSA pipeline, which has kind of always been the general path. Like, you know, I can't tell you how many times like, well, you know, there was 2020 and Bernie Sanders in 2016 that kind of like got me thinking or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I was liberal, but then I was DSA, but then now I'm CP. But I think that's kind of that pipeline is accelerating, and I think a lot of people are like skipping that. And I mean, it's just cool to see that's like more people are becoming open to it. So I don't think it's impossible for people to like come over on their own, because I certainly did. I was a fairly conservative, like liberal Democrat. Like I was pretty like conservative for a Democrat. I was like, well, you know, people on welfare should probably have to pass some kind of test. Like, you know, I used to be that guy. Yeah, I've had conversations with like, I mean, that was as recent as like
piss in here cup.
Yeah, like I've had
Take a
those
test.
conversations. Like,
are you worth having food?
Yeah, like they should have a drug test if they want to get on unemployment or whatever. And it's like, yeah, I used to have those beliefs, and
that's
it's like,
out there.
Yeah, but it's like it didn't take me very long and very much like clicking. I was only a few clicks away from being like, oh, I'm a fucking idiot. Like,
Right.
obviously that's, you know, not what I believe now. And so it is possible for people to have those like that progression. I think that it does require a little bit of like, you know, self-actualization, self-realization, and also like critical thinking to get there.
Yeah.
Which not everybody has.
I don't think if I didn't had the process of leaving Christianity, going like too hardcore atheist, and then like just that whole journey. I mean, that shit took me like 20 years,
Right.
maybe not 15 or something. I don't know. But if I hadn't had that whole process of really trying to like figure out like, what do I believe?
Yeah.
How do I see the world? A lot of people go through their lives and they never even
Never ask
confront
that
that
question? Yeah.
at all, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that is because of, you know, in my case, like a, you know, religious thing, and in other cases, you might have to confront how do you see the world because, you know, you are faced with homelessness, or you are, you know, laid off from your job, or, you know, whatever. There's a lot of different ways that people can kind of be forced to reframe, but like, yeah,
Yeah, for sure.
it's the folks that like never have to.
Just live in their own little bubble forever.
Yep, they just live in their little bubble forever, and I think those are kind of like those elite liberal types that you're talking
Yeah.
about that are like going to be
That's how I-
really so hard to like crack through that shell because they're comfortable. They don't have
Yeah.
any reason to adjust how they see things.
In my experience, that's who those people are. I mean, and to be like, not to like just say they're all like that. Like obviously, like that mentality exists among all classes, among all political ideology. But like, I just see that as like a very like neoliberal, like upper middle class. Like that's the people that think that. Like
Yeah.
they never really get challenged on anything. They're almost exclusively white. Like they just never really get challenged, never really get pushed, never really have to. And they don't really have to be fair. It's like, you know.
I think it's important to recognize here too that their class interests really play into
and
that position that they hold, right?
Well, and as
A lot of times those people have, you know, high paying jobs. They're
Yeah.
property owners. They might be landlords.
Yeah.
They, you know, they have whether or not they recognize it, they have a very much vested interest in capitalism. They probably have no fucking clue, but like
yeah.
there's no reason they're ever going to confront that allegiance to capitalism.
They would never see it that way. Sure.
Because, well, yeah, but like their life is so built around it, right? Like,
yeah. I would probably venture to guess that they don't even see it in those like classist terms. Like
No.
they just see it as like, oh, we're just blessed, we're lucky.
Class
we
is
worked
barely
hard.
discussed in the U.S.
Yeah.
like at all.
Yeah,
Like,
we
we
worked-
have
we worked
Bernie
hard.
to thank for some of that.
Yeah.
Of at least putting that out there. And also, Sean O'Brien, not so much, but the UAW guy, Sean Fain, has been
Yeah.
doing an amazing job of positioning that strike as a class issue.
Yeah.
And specifically like calling out the billionaire class versus the working class. Like
Yeah.
that man's doing some
We
propaganda
we
work.
called
It's
him out
good.
in particular when we did a deeper dive on the UAW, like episode 4 or 5 or something. We were talking about like, yeah, he's like out there quoting Malcolm X. He's like really pushing
Yeah.
back. He's like pretty radical, and it's just really awesome to see that like there's just this big. I don't know. It's really inspiring to see, and it just feels good, and it's making me happy that there is just very vocal, and there's a very spirited push toward just labor in America right now. That like between the UAW, I got to give credit where credit's due. I think the actors and the writers probably had like the most to do with that because that's just a very visible strike.
Yeah.
Because of just that's a very visible industry. But also UAW, also just all of this. The UPS was on pretty much everyone's feed at one point over the summer. So like it's just been a very cool time.
Even though we didn't go on strike, right? There was that was already in the air,
Yeah.
right? Whether it was us or whoever else, right? That threat was credible enough to where we did get some meaningful concessions.
Well, no, like I saw news articles that were like, "What a UPS strike could do to the economy. What a UPS strike could do.
Yeah,
could
I mean-
mean for you." Like that was on everyone's minds for sure.
Being seriously considered as an actual threat. The other thing too is like I was around for the previous contract negotiation 5 years ago. There was not even a discussion or a mention or an inkling of a strike. What?
Never gonna happen.
Like yeah, so like even in 5 years, the climate has changed so much as far as labor.
And that does give me hope. Like, what's it going to look like next year? What's it going to look like the year after?
Yeah.
I kind of attribute that a bit with like I hate to like bring it to it, but like the accelerationist theory. It just like as times are gonna get worse, it's gonna basically radicalize people faster as they're skipping from that like Democrat liberal to DSA to CP, communist. They're just gonna skip things because like that accelerationism is gonna get more people in poverty faster, and once you get in poverty, you kind of view things more in a classist way towards the laborer.
Yep.
Yeah, and I know I was like pro accelerationist a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, I understand the problematic like side to that. But
It's hard
also,
not to be sometimes.
But I also like I think there is a room for it. Like there is a necessity to like if we're gonna do it, let's do it. Like the longer we wait, the more people are dying of starvation, and the more people lose their houses. So like if we're gonna do it, let's just do it.
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily like pro acceleration is like I want shit to go bad. I just think that the inevitable fact is as things are getting worse, it is happening.
Yeah.
So do I want to make things, by voting for the opposite of what we want to make things get worse? Not necessarily. I just think they're going to happen regardless.
Yeah.
And so with or without us trying to speed up the process, I think the capitalists are doing it to themselves, because that is a paradox of capitalism.
Infinite growth in a
Contradiction.
finite world.
Yeah,
It's just all
eventually-
Capitalism.
Yeah.
Not to get all
Eventually,
commie on you.
yeah. I was gonna say eventually we're not gonna make enough money to buy the products that we're selling.
Yeah.
And at that point, who's gonna buy it? Nobody.
Well, that's the great anecdote of I think it was like a crock pot or a rice cooker or a pressure cooker or something, and it was a company that made a really effective. I think this is like kind of a semi-famous like parable of like the problems with capitalism. Is it was a company that made like a really well-made. I want to say it was a pressure cooker or like a crock pot or something, like a slow cooker. It was well made and it had like all the features everybody wanted. And then the company went out of business because everybody bought one and then nobody needed another because it lasted 20 years or whatever. And it's like that.
Exactly.
Like you are penalized for making good products under
And
capitalism.
they do the same thing with cars?
Yeah.
So
They do
with
it with
cars,
everything, yeah.
Well, that company went out of business because they made a good product. So now, like the lesson there is like, oh, you need to make.
But what Kanan is saying, right? It was
Yeah.
like that the lesson was learned we can't make stuff that doesn't break any longer.
Obsolescence. You have
And so
to have
people
stuff
say
that
it's like,
breaks, you have
oh,
to
they
be
didn't
cheap.
make cars like they used to be or whatever. Like it's
Yep.
like, no, it's true.
Yeah.
You know, they make things, even the most minute things, like I don't know, a little computer piece to make your dash lights look cool. That'll break, but the rest of your fucking computer in your car won't work because it's all intertwined. So now you got to go get the entire computer, but you can't do that because you don't have a thing to fix the computer. So they
You don't
do
have the
things on
proprietary software
Yeah.
that needs
Exactly.
to
Well, that's my
interface.
favorite story about Elon Musk and how everybody claims Elon Musk is like some, not that I know I was the one who.
I was gonna say we're getting
Yeah.
back to this man.
No, this is
all
relevant
goes
here.
back.
This is the biggest antidote and the biggest like fallacy of like Elon Musk is some genius and like Elon Musk is leading this charge on like electric vehicles, and like I had to tell my students this is like Elon Musk is the biggest hindrance to electric vehicles, and this is proven in that the Tesla charging port is like Elon Musk claims to be some great inventor, right? But he's pretty much just either bought or stolen every idea that he's ever had, like everything that's
No,
ever
he's
been
just-
successful.
It's a new
He
Thomas
comes in
Edison.
with his money and pays
Yeah.
people to make something
Well,
to
he
make him
does-
more
I think
money,
he
and then
does have-
leverages that into the
He
next
does
thing.
have a couple patents, and I think the one patent he has, or the one invention he has, is the Tesla charging port, which is proprietary, which is unique to Teslas, and every other electric vehicle uses the same universal charging. It's kind of like iPhone versus USB-C for Android. And so what that forces companies that want to install electric chargers in their parking lots to do is to choose one or the other. Tesla has about 50% market share, and all the others share 50% market share. So all Elon has done is divided the electric market and set it back probably forever, right? Because if it was all on universal, then we could all move forward universally.
And
But
you could,
because-
there's so many ramifications to that, right? If it were a universal situation, then you could like start implementing infrastructure around that. Whereas with
Exactly.
this is Engels, right? The anarchy of the free market. You have a problem in which the market is creating all of these various solutions, but there's no organization to it, and so by its nature, you're hindering progress.
If it was a planned economy, like if it was a planned thing, like under a communist government or a communist system, then like you could very easily flip a switch and be like, okay, it's a universal port for all electric cars. We're going to build this infrastructure universally using that one port.
Well, and we can
move
even
forward.
see examples of how, I mean, obviously our ideal future would be communistic, but we can see examples of how even under capitalism this can be done, right? Like the European regulators are like forcing Apple to stop using a
USB-C.
proprietary,
and that's why the new Apple is, or the new iPhone is USB-C.
and so like you could do it. Like you could just be like, hey, everyone who's making an electric car has to use this standardized model. It's illegal to do otherwise. Like you could do that outside of a socialist situation, but it's just the
And that's
willingness is not there.
Yeah, and that's a much larger conversation about like regulations and the backbone of the United States government. Like how does the United States government have the capacity to stand up to Elon Musk and say you are going to make this change? And the answer is obviously no. Like they don't. Like that's not something like government and regulations is something that we like severely lack in this country. But
Thanks, Reagan.
thanks, Reagan. The era of deregulation. Well, we're at about an hour 20.
Ooh,
Damn.
Yeah.
that's pretty good.
This is my kind of podcast. 5-star runtimes, baby. Let's
Yeah, I mean, we have no.
You ever
hard
listen to
cut.
yourself on a podcast?
No, I just really like long podcasts. So I know y'all could try to keep it under an hour, and it's very
No,
funny.
it's fine for a
Yeah,
podcast.
for us, yeah, but when we have a guest, I don't have a problem at all.
That's
with
different,
Just
you
letting
know?
it
Extend it
on.
out a little bit.
Just extend it out like a special conversation.
Y'all want to go for 3 hours?
Yeah, let's do it. Like I said, my
Wait,
wife's-
did you grow up on like Joe Rogan podcast? That's
Oh,
like 3
God, no.
hours.
No, it's more
I've never listened to Joe Rogan podcast.
actual play, like D&D and the role-playing game podcasts. Like a lot of those are like 4 hours long, and so I'm and nature of my work, I listen to podcasts all day, so I love a 3-4 hour podcast.
Yeah, a lot of Rev Left stuff like that. He did that cool breakdown of Lizardo's Black. The
Stalin
book.
history and critique of a Black
That
Legend.
one was like a 3-hour episode or 2.5 hours. So that was a good one. That was a couple months
He has
ago.
a really old episode on Stalin as well that's like 3 hours long. It's
somebody
way back in the archives.
Oh, okay. I'll have to check that out.
From, like,
I'm
2018
a
or
relatively
something.
new Rev Left listener since like this summer. Somebody in our new library program that they set up. Shout out to that new library system we have.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody has that book.
I have that
Oh,
book.
that's you.
Yeah. You want to borrow it?
Yeah, I want to borrow that book. I tried to order it from like Red Left was promoting that new edition that came
Mm-hmm.
out on that new publisher. They have like the discount code, but it was sold out every time I went. And so
Oh, see, I had a trouble where like I couldn't figure out how to use the discount code, and I was also disappointed it like took me to Amazon. I was like, I don't want to buy this shit from
yeah.
Amazon, but I couldn't figure it out. It's like, fuck it.
we had that
Just
that
ordered it.
conversation in the first episode. My love for Stalin. So yeah, I want to read that book.
He's a complicated guy, but
Complicated guy, but
yeah, I haven't gotten around to reading the book yet. The couple podcasts I listened to, like, kind of going through, the major themes of the book, very much kind of got into how, like, his the portrayal of Stalin changed so drastically throughout history. During World War II, the U.S. was very pro-Stalin.
Yeah, 100%.
Like Uncle Joe was what we used to call that guy. And then you see very quickly after
the
World War
second
II
World War II
ended,
ended, just turn on him.
like new enemy is communists. And there's people could do an hours long podcast on whether or not World War II even needed to happen, based on like the fact that the Western powers very much were happy for Hitler to go do his thing and hopefully take down the communists, and they let it drag out a long ass time. If intervention had been done earlier, who fucking knows,
Well,
right?
yeah,
Alternate history, but
America invaded Russia like 30 years prior, and or 20
to
years
try and
prior.
stop
Yeah.
like a dozen nations or something tried to
Yeah,
cut
I think
their
14 all in
revolution.
all. Yeah, tried to stop the Russian Revolution from happening, and America included. And that was like to us, all of us is like, oh, that's all just history. But like if you were living in 1941 or 1943, I guess. Well, no, 41 would have been when the Warsaw Pact, like, or I guess no. 42 would have been Operation Barbarossa.
I'm not going to know the year.
Sure, it doesn't matter.
The year's not important.
I got it in my head a little bit too much.
The events are important.
Yeah, so
fuck
like
history class.
Oh, hey, now I'm a history teacher.
Learn about the things that happened. The dates, not as
The
important.
dates aren't as important. I will concede that. But that had only been like what the Russian Civil War was happening in the early 20s, late teens. That had only been 20 years. So to us, it was like a long time ago, but to them, it had only been 20 years.
Yeah.
That's 2003 in our time, right? Of like that memory was very much.
I don't want to think about 2003.
Fair enough.
No, I'm kidding.
Yeah.
I was
Spears.
dumb.
Okay, I was like, what?
Brown.
I was a dumb teenager.
Teenager.
I was only 8
you're in
years
your late
old.
30s? If you don't mind me asking.
I'm gonna be 34 next year.
Oh, so you're younger than me. Holy shit. Okay.
Only by a little bit.
Yeah.
But
I'm so old, man.
I
No, you're not.
No one I meet is older than me.
the gray in the beard goes a long ways.
Sure.
People often think I'm quite older than I am,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
that's what happens when you have a child. You get gray hairs.
But
I don't know.
I was gonna say,
I had a couple more questions to ask, but yeah, what do you?
No, go for it, go
go
for
for
it.
it.
Question.
I totally spaced out at this point.
Um,
The light got me.
Well, one thing I was going to mention was to kind of cut back to the what I had mentioned by library exchange. We haven't mentioned that before, and just for anybody that's listening that happens to be curious, what I meant by that was that our local Seattle chapter of CPUSA has created kind of one of our comrades has kind of taken it upon themselves to compile all of the books that all of the members have into like a directory or I guess a database, and then we have a book exchange now. So like if we want to read a book, we can get it from they'll connect you with that person that's in your area to get that book delivered to you, which is just this really cool program. I'm excited to like exchange out. I had quite a few that I listed up, and I'm excited to get digging in on that. So
Yeah, like I have, I've picked up a number of books that I told myself I'm on vacation right now. I was like, you're gonna read a book on your vacation.
Nice.
That did
Did
not
not
happen.
happen. Yeah, fair
But it's so hard for me, at least nowadays, to sit down with a physical book. I do audiobooks like primarily, but yeah, I'm more than happy to send off my my books that I haven't finished yet to other comrades, so at least somebody can read it.
Right. Yeah, I've been wanting to read that Lacerdo book in particular since I think it was at our club convention somebody mentioned it, and I that really piqued my interest. I hadn't heard about it before then. I think it was Elijah that had mentioned it, and I was just like, yo, I really want to like dig into that. Or
Yeah, and
Lucas,
supposedly
maybe,
this
I
is a
don't remember.
new like official English translation.
Yeah,
That's supposed to be
so
better
the
than
version you have is that new one from like
Yep.
this summer or whatever. Yeah,
Henry Hakamaki
Yeah.
and I'm not going to remember the other Salvatore something.
yeah,
the
it was
other guy.
another Italian professor, I think. Yeah,
But
that's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah,
It's-
I really want to dig into that. I just, like I said, I'm a big Stalin fan, and I want to like, my Stalin fandom is partially rooted in like the mysticism and like the caricature of Stalin,
Right.
and I'd like to learn more about the actual
Seems
guy.
like the perfect book.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Because it very much, my understanding is that it gets into that, right? Like of how, you know, it's very much about his legend, and
Yeah.
not it's not a biography.
No,
right?
yeah,
It,
for
and
sure.
it very much is about like, okay,
But it
he
delineates
used to be
between,
seen this way, and then
Yeah.
over time, yeah,
Yeah, and I think like my particular interest in Stalin comes from just like how hard people have swung the other way on him.
Oh, yeah.
Like just this, like he gets mentioned in the same conversation as like Hitler and Mussolini, and I'm like, I think that's just such a gross like mischaracterization of like not little, but what I do know about him, which is not insignificant. Like from what I've read and what I've seen in like firsthand accounts of like who he was as a leader and as like as a Marxist and just as like a wartime kind of commander, it's just very different from like the American propaganda of like this bloodthirsty dictator.
right.
And
And I think it's
I wanna
important when like talking about Stalin to like, especially for those of us that are Americans, to really have some self-criticism as to what our opinions are
Yeah.
of that, you know, whether it be Stalin or the USSR or you know other communist figures, but like in the instance of Stalin, to really examine that, like, where have my opinions of Stalin come from?
Sure.
And why do I feel this way? And are these, you know, accusations of him being like a worse mass murderer than Hitler or other shit you'll see thrown around, are those things even legitimate or accurate, right? Like, they're obviously, dude fucked up a lot, right?
Sure.
Every human being fucks up, right?
Yeah.
And especially when you put somebody in a position of power, those fuck ups are going to have big ripple effects that might be bad, right? But it's the framing of it, and the it's important to recognize how much of a purpose it serves to frame him so negatively.
Yeah, 100%.
Right.
Like to what? Like why are you? What is your end? Like to what end are you just like saying like, oh, we need to make sure this guy is remembered as a bloodthirsty dictator?
Right.
So,
And
like,
we
what's your
should,
motivation?
as communists, we should not be afraid of the criticisms that
100%.
exist of Stalin, and we should be happy to talk about them. Like the deportations of, you know, ethnic groups is
Sure.
just fucked.
Yeah,
like there's
just
no
awful.
defending that.
And like, there is like, to be fair, like with a lot of like the criticism that is levied of like the starvation, like the famines, is like, yeah, they had tried like a form of collective agriculture that just like it simply did not work, and like that wasn't intentional murder, but
Right.
it did result in the death of a lot of people because of like how poorly managed and how poorly implemented like this collective agriculture worked.
right.
And
See, that's where Western media will spin it to make it look like he murdered those people on purpose.
Well,
He
that's-
took all
yeah.
that grain with his huge giant spoon.
that giant spoon, yeah, that's the meme, right? Like, and so like, but what I can like forgive, if for lack of a better term, is that like that was in an attempt to collectivize farming and like feed a nation, and like
Right.
that was the goal was intentionally, like, if I can, you know, speak for Stalin, for however
Do
strange
it.
that is, but like the goal was like to better society. Like it was
Yeah.
an attempt to feed hungry people, and like it didn't work, and it resulted in the death of a lot of people, and like I can almost forgive that. But like to compare that to like Britain's colonization of India, and like how many like what was it was like a magnitude of like 18 times more Indians died under
And that was
Churchill.
intentional.
And that was intentional. And
of
like
like, no, fuck them.
Do we-
We'll take all the grain. We'll take all of the resources.
And it's just so frustrating to think of like we do not spin Churchill. Like Churchill is a much worse, an actual bloodthirsty dictator than Stalin. But like, do we remember Churchill as such? No.
I mean, he's a colonialist, like well into the 40s.
But I mean, like any academic, any school child, any mainstream normie would say like, oh, Churchill was like the hero, the lion of England, and like he's a good guy. Or he's remembered. And they ask him what they think of Stalin, and it's like, but Churchill murdered way more people intentionally than Stalin did accidentally. But that's I think my point is like that's the frustration.
The other big thing to consider on the subject of Stalin is not to fall into the trap of great man theory, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And to like, I mean, you can go onto the CIA's website and read the document that the CIA wrote about Stalin that says that his position as a dictator that was very much, put out throughout the U.S. was not accurate. Like the CIA themselves, go on their website and look at it. They said he was more like the captain of a team. Was what they said. And so it's important to remember, and the same can go for Churchill, right? Like, these guys from history that we prop up as these like sole, like, all powerful movers of pieces on the board. It's just not accurate of how history plays out, right?
100%.
Stalin was doing things with, the power of the party behind him, and with many people, suggesting to him things for him to do, and many people, on board, with the good and the bad, right?
It was a Soviet. It was a council of people.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, this is kind of a tangent, but also like, you go read about Stalin and about how many times he asked to be like not in charge any longer, and how many times the Soviets, the council and everything were
denied that. Yeah,
we're saying no, we actually really love your leadership and we need you to be here, please. And anti-communists will spin that and say, oh well, that was just they couldn't say otherwise. They had to say that he needed to stay, otherwise he would have had them killed. And okay, whatever. There's a million ways you can take a conversation about Stalin, but I think the big things to take away is like, or to remember when you're talking about Stalin is to not get caught up in that great man shit of how the things that were happening, throughout his lifetime in the Soviet Union were not solely his engineering, but also that he was a guy who, like any of us, I can't imagine what it would be like to be in a position like his.
Yeah. Commanding probably what was at the time the second most powerful, or arguably tied for the most powerful nation in the world. How many 100 million people?
Yeah. I think at the end of the day, we should just really focus on what are the facts. You could put your own bias into things, but a lot of people just keep taking opinionated, biases of how people are interpreting what he did versus what are the literal facts that he did, and add your own personal bias to it.
Well, that's important too. I mean, that's the Marxist perspective, right? Is like examining it and analyzing it and learning from it. That's all well and good from like a historical perspective. If you want to be a history teacher, if you want to be a historian, but then to be a Marxist is to take that and apply it to today. And this is kind of what I was railing against a couple episodes ago. Is like, well, that's the Marxist perspective is, okay, what did we learn from it? How can we improve upon it? How can we take that and apply it to today? So like, what can we do better? That's
I think the last thing I would say on Stalin is I think it's also a totally acceptable and fine position to have of like, I don't really care about what happened 80 years ago. I mean, it matters. It like extremely matters, but like in our current climate of organizing and being on the left, whether you call yourself a communist or an anarchist or whatever, like to get so caught up and tied up about like debates and arguments that were happening like at this point almost 100 years ago, like between Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin, like y'all, we fucking need to move on. Like that history is good and important to learn from, but it shouldn't be the thing that is like defining your like political ideology. Like you shouldn't like if you're so obsessed with how bad Stalin was, or I don't know, like if you're on the other side of like I'm so horny for Stalin that like he like Stalin never did anything wrong, like you're also wrong. Like
Yeah.
right? Like don't let it like get you so caught up about, you know, we should learn from the history, not like live our lives based on it. We should not be totally fully like caught up and wrapped up and obsessed over it.
Yeah, I think a good way to like kind of frame that is like if you're doing like mutual aid outreach, like the homeless encampment down the street doesn't care what you're like, what the difference between Stalin and Trotsky are, right? Like,
or like also you shouldn't like choose to not organize with a group because they're Marxist-Leninists, and that means that they like maybe are more favorable in their opinion of you know, their historical view of Stalin. Like just because, or you know, or on the flip side, like, you know, if you know some anarchists who are like absolutely I hate Stalin and I hate, you know, the state or whatever, if those people are doing good work and you want to do good work with them, then go do that good work, and who cares about like your differences over your opinions of stuff that happened 80 years ago. Like, y'all should be able to have adult conversations about that shit and not like lose out the ability to like do good work.
I 100% agree. I think that there is a time and a place, and I do like having those conversations when you get into like the deep like theory and the philosophy and the debates about like the minutia of it, but also I recognize that I am a historian. I have history degrees, and that's like that's where I live, is in that world. And I do separate that from like last night I was out all night with one of the local mutual aid groups doing like outreach for our houseless people in Seattle. And so like you can separate it, and I think that there's a time and a place to have those debates if you're having like a very philosophical, theoretical conversation. But you're 100% right. Like at a certain point, like that no longer matters, and like we just need to move forward with like what do we need for our community now, not 80 years ago.
Yeah. To not to drag this podcast out forever, but we had a weird situation in our club where a guy came out from Idaho and was trying to like do some work with us, and like at least that was what he told us. He wanted
this
to.
Is the K situation?
What?
This is the K situation?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it turned out the guy was like he said he wasn't, but he was a Trotskyist, and like really, really was focused on like recommending Trotsky's writing to us as a club to read. And then also like when he actually got out here and was able to like, you know, we kind of held a talk where he you know, made a presentation and stuff, and then after the fact he was trying to like sow some kind of discord between various party members and like club leadership, and like break people up, and like he clearly was doing some like breaker type stuff, unfortunately,
like infiltrator shit.
Like just weird. And but like one of the things that our, you know, club chair Karen talked about was that you know, that the over obsession on Trotsky, and like he at one point said like, I don't care about, you know, about that. Not right now. Not in this moment when we're trying to talk about like organizing between Seattle and Idaho and potentially like having our organizations work together. Unfortunately, what Trotsky said to Lenin 85 years ago doesn't apply here.
Really matter.
Like, yes, we should learn from that stuff, but like it's the over obsession.
Yeah. Well, shout out to Kieran too, because that's funny when you say I don't care. I've heard him say that too at that at that U District tabling where we had a few good conversations. I mentioned that there were a couple like bad actors that came up and just wanted to kind of they weren't outright antagonistic, but they were just kind of very like argumentative.
Right.
And I totally like failed. I fell into the trap of
it's
like
easy.
I was just like, no, listen here, because like that was the historical side of me. The story, like the both the teacher and historian side of me was like, well, hold on, this is where you're wrong. This is what happened. This. And Karen was just like, guys, I don't care. It doesn't matter. That's not what we're here for.
Right.
Let's not talk about that now. And I was like, you're right, Kieran. Good job.
Yeah. How is that affecting people who are homeless in Seattle?
Yeah.
How is that affecting the reason we're here at the table to like, you know, promote this event to, you know, have people come out and learn from Lady Izdahar, right? Like, it was just that's just funny that you mentioned that, because I've seen that in action of just like that's not why we're here. I don't care about that. It can be a good way to shut somebody down who is really tied up on something that's not like immediately relevant.
Yeah, it works both ways, both on our side of things that are like people getting too deep, and also somebody that's being a little like yeah, but you know, like just the antagonistic side of it. It works on both sides.
I think just focus on, a left of the future, the Marxism of the future. I don't know people are just so settled in the past, like having argumentative, ideals thrown around that happened 100 years ago between like two random guys in the middle of Siberia. It's like, who the fuck cares? Like back when Trotsky was living and Lenin was living, there was no self-driving cars. Like we have a whole different situation. We have a whole different bourgeoisie. We have a whole different type of universe that we have to like look after. They didn't have global climate change. We have a whole different thing that we need to like focus on, like the future, and quit dwelling on the past. We learn from the past, just in like Marxist perspectives,
Right.
but we need to focus on the future. It's like, what is the future if this keeps going with how fast we're growing, or how fast the whole ideal of Marxism is growing? How are we going to collect that into a single thought with the vanguard and push that onto society versus just like fight against each other?
Yeah.
You're with us or you're against us, It's just like, and it doesn't have to be all Marxists, Leninists. It could be just leftist groups in general. At the end of the day, we just need some kind of large enough upbringing, and it's not going to be with us alone.
Yeah, you shouldn't be. If you're anti-capitalist, you should not be like saying because of somebody's opinion on a various historical thing, you're writing them off completely, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you're a Marxist-Leninist, you maybe believe that your approach is the correct way, and you would want to help others find that methodology that we employ, but that doesn't mean that like we look at an anarchist and say you're the devil or whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Or like I would be happy to work with any person who considers themselves an anti-capitalist, so long as they're happy to work with us.
Yeah.
Right?
And I think we see that a lot. I mean, there's like a couple of quote unquote anarchists even in CP. Like they're out there, they're helping, they're very much active, but they would personally like self-identify as an anarchist. And I think that's we've had spirited political debates or philosophical debates, but like that largely doesn't matter. What matters is that they're out there helping, and they're part of these coalitions that we're trying to build and these like communities that we're trying to help, and that's all that really matters.
We'll deal with them later on once we get like the first initial stage brought up.
Tough questions will have to happen during the revolution, but
they
until
won't
then,
get to gulag, but they.
No, we're not going to do gulags the next time around.
Yeah, no more
we'll have to
gulags. Maybe just for very minute people.
we'll have to rework the gulag system.
Yeah.
Re-education.
Well, let me ask you kind of as a closing out question, or as a nearing closing out question. Where do you see? We've talked a lot about kind of this idea of optimism and inspiration, and kind of moving forward. We're seeing bigger drives. We're seeing larger, bigger growth for a lot of not just CP, but I mean that's across the board of every leftist kind of club and organization. Where do you see kind of the future of American leftism like going? Like, what's your ideal kind of end point, or what's your hopeful kind of end point or current status?
I think my hopeful is very different from my realistic.
Sure.
Hopeful would be we have a mainstream communist party that has mass support and is able to enforce demands based on that mass support, right? Whether or not we are end up with through that party in an actual revolution, or just utilizing that party to kind of go like have some reforms put into place that people need. My realistic, maybe a little more pessimistic than that. I try to be optimistic for most things, but I think that America is pretty far away from a general like leftist consciousness, or like a communist consciousness. I would love to see it, but I don't know. It's hard to it's hard to envision. I'm interested to see how this next election goes. There is a lot of kind of fighting back and forth about whether or not people are obligated to vote for Joe Biden, or whatever. But yeah, I worry that we are kind of still trying to dig out from under that like century of anti-communism, that propaganda that has been so prevalent as part of American culture, that a lot of folks will refuse to engage with anything socialist or communist because they think it's evil. They think it's just a way for people to try and get power or whatever, whatever they've been taught that it is, even though it's not. But I think it is really important to kind of, even if you maybe feel that way sometimes, to root yourself in the more hopeful side of things, to kind of force yourself to like take that more hopeful position of, we don't know when it might be, but someday maybe we do have a really powerful communist party in the U.S. that's marching in the streets. That's getting such things as like, if it were happening now, a ceasefire, I'd love to see that in my lifetime. I think climate change is going to, as it continues to cause more crisis and catastrophe, it's going to play a big part in kind of like we touched on accelerationism, right? Like, we don't necessarily want to advocate for causing things that are going to push people left, but as bad things happen, people are going to have reactions to those bad things. Yeah. And a lot of the time, if those bad things leave people in a place where they're really struggling, they're going to, hopefully, find communism, right? Yeah. Find socialism, find Marxism, and start doing the work to work towards that.
So you find that maybe climate change is going to be the next like major galvanizing kind of event to lead
absolutely
the masses left.
It's kind of an amorphous one, right? That like we know that it's out there and we know that it's causing changes to our environment, but until like major disasters happen, people might agree that it exists and that it's out there, but if it's not impacting their lives, it doesn't really impact them, right? It's kind of like the bubble we were talking about before. Yeah. But unfortunately, the reality of climate change is shit's going to get more and more real, faster and faster, and then inevitably, people are going to be forced to make choices of, I mean, we're going to be looking at like mass migrations in the next I forget decade or two.
Who kind of like, I want to give them credit. I forgot who like kind of coined that term or coined this idea. Somebody I heard somewhere, which was like, climate change isn't like, it's the way we think of it isn't like how it's really going to happen. I mean, what it is we're just going to be scrolling and watching videos of these kind of catastrophic events until we're filming one, until we're the one filming it, and that's how it's really going to impact it. It's not just going to be some Mad Max dystopia. It's like it's a very slow, very gradual thing, and I think it's kind of the frog in the boiling water kind of parable, which is like,
and the reality is it's already happening.
Yeah,
it's just not happening to us right now.
Yeah, not us right now. Until we're the ones filming it, it's not really going to impact us.
Yep.
Well, what's great about those videos though is that like it for example, with like this whole Palestinian conflict, you realize how globalized the world really is, with all almost like all these people from vast different countries kind of coming together and having like a global voice for the Palestinian lives. So I think the same thing could happen for that like global outreach for like climate change. And at the forefront, we have to be at that, that forefront as like, say, the CPUSA.
As a vanguard, yeah.
Yeah, as the vanguard. And that, I think, might be the only way to really push capitalism off this globe is by having this globalized voice
Yeah.
and being the leader of that globalized voice. And at that point, through globalization, you might actually come back to America to have a strong communist party. Not because of Americans, but just the whole globe in general.
Yeah, I think there are people that know a lot more about this than I do, but I think there is something to be said for like, was it Lenin that talked about how like the revolution is going to take place at like the weakest links in the chain? And whether or not the revolution will begin in the United States, I don't necessarily feel that it will. I think there's way too much power entrenched against that happening. But I do think it can reach a point where there will be various revolutions taking place, internationally. And then when you do have that kind of global perspective, with people watching on their phones, there's going to reach a point, right, where people are seeing this shit happening all over the world and then wondering why isn't it happening here. And so hopefully, someday I would love to see it in my lifetime. I would love for my kid to be able to grow up in a world that's different than this one. That's what I hope for.
Right.
I don't think we have much of a choice but to make it happen in our lifetime. Because with climate change,
Right.
there is no after.
Yeah, there is a clock. Kind of like that's the reality is that you're right, that there is like it's kind of a shit or get off the pot kind of situation here where there is a ticking clock on what we can do or what we're going to be faced with.
That's what's beautiful about like the whole idea behind like just the natural cause of accelerationism is like it took us so long to get here, but like was it Lenin that said there's like a few weeks where history happens and then there's like a few years where like nothing happens.
There are weeks where decades happen.
There we go.
There are
Decades
where
weeks
nothing
happen.
happens.
And I think that's happening now, and it's gonna keep just happening.
Yep. Well, Ben, you got anything you want to like plug? Anything you have a TikTok account you want people to know about or no?
No, I don't
Nothing?
post. I just
just
lurk.
scroll? Okay,
I just
fair
watch. I'm not out there on social media like that. but-
Okay, cool. Well, we'll say what we always say. Join an org. We prefer CPUSA, but just join some org. Get out there and help. Find some kind of mutual aid, direct action in your neighborhood.
Look on social media, like in your city and stuff, right? Like look for accounts that are, CPUSA we'd recommend, but right, like if you live in a city where that's not happening, see who is.
Yeah, there's probably a DSA.
Or
There's
start
probably
it.
something, or there's probably some kind of just or start it yourself. But there's also like little what do you call them, like community fridges or something. Like there are usually like a little food not bombs or some little anarchist group somewhere. Anarchists are really
Mutual
good
aid
about
groups.
just doing little mutual aid work. And also I've been pretty down on DSA in the past. I've kind of shit on DSA, but I will say that like the Stop the Boat Tacoma thing, like that was largely orchestrated by the Tacoma DSA. So like got to give them shout out. Like they're actually out there. So maybe I need to revisit my hatred of the DSA.
Depends on your chapter, from what
I
heard.
guess, yeah. Well, like in my experience, the Arizona chapters were pretty much just blue no matter who. Like they were just essentially just a liberal offshoot of the Democratic Party, or an offshoot of the liberal Democratic Party. But I digress. Even if that's all you got, then go out there and get help. And like the point is that like there are people that could use help, and there are community building. There is community building that needs to happen. So get out there, join your local whatever it is.
Yeah,
Put your theory into practice.
Yeah, that's it.
exactly.
Read some books, but then go out there and actually act on it. Praxis.
Yeah. Don't forget to follow our other pages, Twitter, YouTube, any place you can get your audio podcasts,
Revolutionary
Instagram,
rhetoric, everywhere you look.
TikTok, and click that video right up there for the very next video after this 2-hour video. And
Yeah.
Just do it.
Special treat for anyone who actually stayed to the end.
Yeah. Hey guys. Thank you, Ben.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, Ben. Thanks for coming over. Thanks for having a really great conversation. We kind of took it all over the place, but
That's fun.
2 hours in, we got a lot talked about. Really fun. Thanks for having.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. See you guys.
Bye.